Now, the French troops were conscripts with truly terrible pay and with no welfare facilities. Many of the French soldiers had had no leave for 12 months. Now, the French army was egalitarian with working class officers, whereas the British army of the First World War was heavily class ridden. British upper class officers, however, organised concerts, they organised football matches, they organised leave for their men, they organised canteens and theatres. The British army, because the soldiery from the working classes were used at home to being told what to do by the upper classes, and because there was that easy distance by class, it meant that the British officers were able to muck in with the men and organise decent rest opportunities for them without losing their authority. Whereas the French army, because they were led by the same class as were actually being the soldiers, then they didn't have that natural distance between officer and man, which meant that the French officers had to deliberately keep themselves apart from their men, not organising the same rest activities that the British army did. The British army had this idea of noblesse oblige, the idea that so the upper classes had to look after their men, that they were like their fathers. You'll find lots of pictures of British officers inspecting the feet of British soldiers to make sure that they've been put in whale oil in so they don't get trench foot. The British upper class officers, although we have this idea from things like Blackadder that they were uncaring of the men, the reverse is actually true, that the British officers appear to have cared deeply for their men. And again, although we have this idea that it's the private baldricks of this world that pay the butcher's bill for the First World War, that's not true. You're far more likely to be killed in the British army the richer you are. The Germans deliberately shoot officers because they're the ones who know what they're doing. And the British officers have got some beautiful uniforms with their with the silver thread onto the sleeves so that they can point to where men to go in no man's land. And they don't have to, actually the British officers don't have to carry a gun until after the First World War. A lot of them just go over the top with their swagger sticks. So they're going over the top with their swagger sticks and these magnificent uniforms, waving their arms in no man's land. The Germans just kill them. And so you're far more likely to be killed in the First World War for the British if you're a public schoolboy, which is why the life expectancy of a second lieutenant in the British Army during a major offensive is some 4 minutes. And so, but the British soldiers are being looked after by these upper class officers. The French soldiers are being largely ignored by their own working class officers. And on the 29th of April, with the dashing of their high hopes and with the huge casualties that they have been suffering, the French army mutiny. Maybe as many as 2/3 of the French army refuse to fight anymore, mostly when they're drunk. A lot of the mutinies end, however, the next day, when they wake up with a terrible hangover and they work out that they realise just what they've done. But the mutinies would splutter on from the 29th of April up till August. The Germans did not know it, but they are on the verge of winning the war. The Russian Tsar had gone, the Russian army was starting to crumble under questions of who got the land back home, and now the French army is refusing to fight. The British army is the only one left in the field. Yes, there's the Italian army getting nowhere in the Alps. The Americans are in the war, but their troops are not. The Germans are on the verge of winning the war. But the French don't tell the British what's just happened. They can't bring themselves to tell the British that their army has effectively been knocked out of the war. On the 15th of May, Nivelle resigns to be replaced by Pétain, who tells the British that the British have to now plan to attack on their own, but doesn't tell the British why the British have to plan to attack on their own. Doesn't tell them yet that the French army has collapsed. And so the British plan for their own attack, the Battle of Messines Ridge. Now, Haig had wanted to attack here in 1916 instead of on the Somme, where he was made to attack. And he'd wanted to attack here in the April of 1917 instead of attacking at Arras. And so, finally left to his own devices, the attack on Messines Ridge was on. But in 1916, when he'd wanted to attack here, the defences here were weak. But another year of Germany pouring concrete and wire onto this ridge meant that by 1917 the defences of Messines Ridge are formidable. 75,000 men, supported by 630 guns in 3 lines of bunkers built onto a ridge of high ground. But why attack there then if they've turned it into such a fortress? Well, it's incredibly important. The ridge dominates the southern flank of Ypres. Haig decided that it must fall before the British could advance out of Ypres. So he gave the job to Plumer's Second Army. Now, Plumer was a careful, cautious general. He flooded the sky with British planes, and on the 21st of May, a 17-day artillery barrage began. In the last 7 days of that barrage alone, the British artillery fired 3.5 million shells, and 24 mines were dug beneath Messines Ridge. Remember these tunnels packed with explosives underneath the German defences. And they put in these 24 mines £1 million of high explosives. The aircraft were used to spot out where the German artillery was positioned, so that by the 26th of May, half of all the German guns along the ridge had already been destroyed before the British go over the top. Now, as it happens, the German army, taking this pounding from the artillery, accurately guided by aerial spotting, consider actually just pulling back from this ridgeline and abandoning these fortifications. They don't know about the mines, but the artillery barrage is so painful to the German infantry that they consider abandoning the ridge, but they reject the idea, and for them that will be a fatal mistake. On the 7th of June, at 3:10 in the morning, the British attacked, blowing up 19 of these mines. At Lille, 12 miles away, the German troops there thought an earthquake had hit. The British infantry stormed forward into the blast, coming so close to their own explosions that some were injured by stones falling from the sky, because they'd learnt in 1916 if you just blew up a mine and then waited, the Germans recaptured the ground and fortified the crater. So this time they're going to give the Germans no time to occupy those craters. The British infantry go over the top, knowing the mine's going to explode in front of them, and then bang, the ground shakes and rives, and you storm forward to take the crater. Some of the injuries are caused because one mine was 20 seconds late. That's now how pinpoint the British planning has got, that a 20-second delay causes injury to their own side. But 72 tanks also lead the attack, while the artillery launch a creeping barrage. And the infantry now, they're not just advancing with their rifles held, they're advancing by fire and movement. You have a line of British troops rushing forward, then hitting the dirt and opening fire with their rifles, while another line rushes forward, goes past that first line, drops to the ground, opens fire with their rifles, as waves of British troops leapfrog each other towards the German lines. By 5:30 in the morning, just over 2 hours into the battle, the British infantry halt at the top of the ridge, and then they wait for the British artillery to drag the heavy guns forward to pound the German second lines so they can advance again. They've already learnt lessons from Arras not to advance beyond the artillery support. By midday on the first day, the German third line had already fallen, and the British pause again, telling these troops that they've done their job, that they're tired now, and fresh troops are brought forward to carry on the advance. At 3:10, the Oosterwern line is broken, the German fourth line, and Plumer and Haig halt the attack. It has been one hell of a 12 hours for the British and German armies. The German defences have been captured. The British army has gone through them like a red-hot knife through butter. Plumer had famously said of these mines, he said, "Gentlemen, we may not change history, but we sure as hell will change the geography." And even now, even today, the area has been transformed by the explosions of these craters. This heavily defended ridge, this nightmare of concrete and steel, had fallen in a day. The Germans have suffered 25,000 casualties, the British 24,500 casualties, which, considering the Germans defending, is quite an achievement. But The German casualties include 8,000 dead, the British only 3,500 dead, and the British also capture 7,300 Germans. Only 3% of the British attacking infantry are killed, and they had advanced 3.5 miles along a 5-mile front through some of the thickest defences of the German lines. The American army would use the Battle of Messines as a model of how to do the perfect attack.